Chapter 676. Glass knife surrounded by devastation. Sunny, Kai, and Effie stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. Their weapons were still raised, ready to strike at the enemies. However, there were no enemies around. Just dead silence. Sunny tensely studied the devastated hall, then slowly pulled out the emerald amulet and looked at the little girl with a silent question written on his face. Effie, tell me, is there perhaps a slumbering saint somewhere in the temple? She frowned, then shook her head. Sunny was genuinely perplexed. Maybe there is an indescribable horror that had been contained by the chalice, and we have set it free, or an ancient curse. The little girl wiped the sweat off her bruised face, then said in her soft, childish voice, "Not that I know of. No, there are no horrors or curses." Sunny blinked a couple of times. So what, we really won, just like that? Effie stared at him for a bit, and then yelped in outrage. What the hell do you mean by just like that? We just wiped out 100 vicious awakened battle zealots, and you yourself killed 3 ascended champions. Not to mention destroying the chalice, which was supposed to be indestructible. By the way, was that not hard enough for you, you crazy demon? He tilted his head a little and thought about it. Well, when you put it like that, I guess it was a bit hard. The 3 of them, especially Sunny, had indeed achieved something remarkable just now. But it still felt weird. He didn't even lose a single limb, body part, or heart. Well, he did lose half of a horn. That had to count for something, probably. Sunny scowled. That victory had not been easy. In fact, it had been the opposite of that. However, it had not been as costly as he would have expected it to be. 3 ascended were no joke, let alone as fearsome as the war maidens had been. Granted, they had faced him after being mangled by the strike of thunder and the consequent explosion of the chalice, and he had only been able to damage the chalice, thus allowing the divine flame contained within to destroy it, because of his insight into how true sorcery worked. So, in a sense, this victory was the result of those months Sunny had spent barely surviving in the Red Colosseum, as well as his trials in the countless nightmares that gifted him his 3rd shadow. And more than a bit of luck. He sighed, then asked dubiously, "So what, we can just go?" Effie looked around, her gaze lingering on the corpse of the white-haired maiden for a few seconds. Her little face turned somber, and then she simply shrugged. "Unless you want to get roasted even more by the divine flames, I suggest we do." Kai, who had been silent this whole time, looked around as well. His gaze, however, seemed to be aimed at something beyond the walls of the devastated hall. Then he lowered his head, his eyes turning dark. The young man lingered for a few moments, and then said in a low, hoarse voice, Are there other children that were being trained in the sect? Do we need to take them with us?" Sunny froze, then scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. "Oh yes, I did not think about that. The war maidens were known to take in orphaned girls, right? Where are they?" He wasn't too happy about the prospect of taking care of a bunch of kids, especially since he had just slaughtered their previous caretakers. But the idea of leaving them here did not sit right with Sunny, whether or not they were just phantasms of the nightmare. Noctis would end up having to deal with settling the children in the sanctuary, anyway. Effie's childish face slowly turned still, and she briefly glanced down, in the direction where Kai had been looking a few moments ago. She turned away and said in a strangely even tone, There were a few other girls with me before, indeed, but they didn't make it." She dismissed the dusk shard, then bent down to pick up one of the swords laying on the stones. The war maidens were not bad people, you see, at least not at the start of it all. But somewhere along the way, the sect changed. By the time the girl whose body I took over ended up with them, it was as though everyone here had gone insane. She walked to the next corpse, stared at it with strange darkness in her eyes, and then picked up another weapon. They were obsessed with the idea of creating a warrior capable of slaying someone called solving. So their training, what they called training, anyway, had grown vicious, cruel, and inhumanly hard. Of all the girls subjected to it, only a handful survived. In this batch, I was the only one. Effie sighed, then stopped, staring once again at the body of the white-haired war maiden with a complicated expression. Strange, isn't it? It was not like they hated us. On the contrary, they seemed to care about their wards a great deal. Didn't stop them from killing us, though. She remained silent for a bit, and then added, and despite the fact those girls were being tormented and killed, it didn't stop them from loving their killers. Humans are very weird that way, huh? The little girl was silent for a few moments, then suddenly smiled. So yeah, I would like to get out of this place very much. If there is nothing else, let's just go. Sunny hesitated, then silently motioned to Kai to come closer to Effie. She was putting on a brave face, but he could sense that beneath it, the huntress was deeply disturbed by what had happened to her in this temple and what they had done to the temple themselves. Then he turned around and headed for what remained of the stone chalice. As he got closer, the heat of the divine flame grew almost unbearable. Sunny once again activated the enchantment of the memory of fire and the augmentation of the underworld armament, then moved carefully between the burning shards of stone. In the spot where the chalice had stood before, surrounded by a ring of flames, a simple knife made of a piece of ghostly glass lay, reflecting the furious white light of the fire. Because of the shape and position of the deep fractures that had spread through the cracked floor, it seemed as though the glass blade had been the epicenter of the terrible explosion. There was not a single blemish on its surface, though. Sunny lingered for a moment, then leaned forward and picked up the glass knife. It was light and cool to the touch, just how he remembered it. Just to make sure, Sunny glanced beneath the surface of the glass blade and froze for a moment, transfixed by the sight of a single string of fate encased within it, looping endlessly on itself. Even if he had not seen that knife in one of his nightmares, he would have instantly recognized it for what it was. The key to an immortal's death, the Ivory Lord's death. He had found it, outside of the now empty temple of the chalice. The dawn was slowly painting the world in a beautiful shade of lilac. Sunny was sitting on the ground, staring at a scarlet odachi, and a spear with a blade etched with runes that lay on the ground in front of him. Kai had dismissed his armor and was standing nearby, his wooden mask charred and blackened by the heat of the divine flames. His gaze was distant. Effie was also close. She was standing in front of a pile of weapons, some of them whole, some broken and melted by the fire. Despite her exhaustion and injuries, the little girl, whose body was almost entirely covered by bruises and lacerations, was picking up one weapon after another, then thrusting them into the rocky ground with somber determination. The graveyard of swords surrounding the temple was slowly growing, thanks to her efforts. Sunny observed Effie for a while, then sighed. He did not see a lot of sense in leaving so many enchanted weapons behind, even if most of them were only equivalent to awakened memories. However, he was also not going to stop the girl from performing the wasteful ritual, as long as it gave her some closure, or whatever it was she was seeking by performing the strange burial. It gave him food for thought, however. In the future, he knew, there was no such graveyard around the ruined temple of the chalice, which meant that no one had done this last mercy for the war maidens slaughtered in the Great Hall. Was that the reason they had turned into vengeful wraiths, perhaps? Maybe. Or maybe the swords had just been stolen or destroyed at some point later in time. He had not seen the rest of the graveyard in the future as well, after all. So then, what, exactly, was the connection between the nightmares and the dream realm? Before, Sunny had been sure that nightmares were simply recreations of the past. Now, however, he was not so certain. After all, the temple of the chalice was destroyed in the same exact manner as it had been in the future. Which meant that he had always been the one to destroy it. The seed of nightmare was a portal to the actual past. Sonny scowled, then shook his head. No, this didn't make any sense. If that was true, then too many things would have been changed in the waking world every time an awakened conquered their nightmare. The connection was too easy to spot. All he had to do was to go and carve his name into one of the menhirs of the sanctuary, then check if it had actually appeared outside the seed. People weren't fools, they would have known by now. Nightmares were almost certainly simply recreations of the past of the dream realm, and not the actual thing. However, the coincidence of how the Temple of the Chalice had ended up was too glaring to be natural. Logically, the appearance of Awakened from the waking world should have changed the course of events that had happened in the past completely. And yet, it had not, at least not yet. He could think of two explanations for that, one far less frightening than the other. The first explanation was that this was a simple case of his knowledge of the future informing his actions in the past. Sonny had thought of destroying the chalice because he had already seen it destroyed in the future, and so the cycle had been complete without any ominous reasons, just due to a logical connection. The second explanation was far more concerning, at least to Sonny. He knew more about fate than most people. He knew how hard it was to change it, let alone escape its stranglehold completely. So what? What if fate had a pull on all things, had influence over all of existence, and pushed everything, everywhere in a certain direction? To a certain conclusion, no less. If so, the details of what happened could potentially change, but the end would inevitably and inescapably be the same. That was a thought that terrified Sonny beyond belief. He had proclaimed fate to be his sworn enemy after all, and now that enemy seemed more fearsome than ever. With a grim expression, he glanced at Effie one more time, then rose from the ground and walked over to the pile of weapons, picking one of them up and thrusting it into the ground. The girl was breathing heavily, her little body seemingly on the verge of collapse. Nevertheless, she glanced at Sonny with a stubborn expression. "What are you doing?" Sonny picked up another sword and shrugged. "Helping? You must be hungry, are you not? The sooner we are done with this, the sooner you can eat. Everyone wins, no?" Effie hesitated for a bit, then turned away and nodded slowly. Together, they continued to bury the swords of the maidens in the rocky soil, with Kai soon joining them. Before too long, the pile of weapons had disappeared, joining the countless swords surrounding the empty, silent temple. Sonny did not know if what they had done was going to change fate, even a little bit. But he hoped ardently that it would. The next morning, the inhabitants of the sanctuary saw a very peculiar thing. A man in a wooden mask and with skin that resembled tree bark effortlessly landed on the soft grass of the island, his tall figure covered by a fitting silk garment. A moment later, a towering four-armed demon climbed from beneath the island and joined him. However, that was not all. There was a scrawny girl of about 11 or 12 years of age sitting on the shoulders of the demon, holding his horns with her little hands and swinging her skinny legs wildly. "Giddy up faster." Listening to Effie laugh, Sonny gritted his teeth, then said with irritation, "Can you stop swinging your legs? I'm not a horse, damn it." The huntress did not listen, so he grabbed her legs with two of his four hands and held them in place, which was not easy to do, considering the little girl's monstrous strength. "Ouch, my bruises." Effie made a pitiful face and whimpered. "Oh no, please don't hurt me, Uncle Demon. I'll be good, I promise. I'll try to recover from the beatings faster. You don't need to get angry." As the people stared at the girl's terribly bruised body with dark expressions, then looked at Sonny angrily, he hissed, "I didn't, she's not. You stop it right now, Effie. That is not funny." The little girl threw her head back and laughed again, then leaned down with a mischievous smile. "Yes, of course, whatever you say, Uncle." After that, she glanced at the tall menhirs of the sanctuary and lingered for a few moments, then whispered quietly into his ear. So, let me get this straight. Everyone in this nightmare was driven insane by the demon of desire, and to conquer it, we need to set her free with the help of a mad transcendent sorcerer who wants to defy the gods, start a war against the other four-chain lords and kill them. And it was that guy, Noctis, who sent you to the Temple of the Chalice. He is the one we are here to see. Sonny looked forward with a dark expression on his bestial face, and then growled. More or less, we have a thing or two to discuss with him. He paused for a moment before adding, murderous flames igniting in his eyes. Because I am pretty sure that Noctis, that rotten bastard, has swindled me again. The three of them entered the sanctuary, crossed the beautiful garden, and entered the sorcerer's residence through a familiar wooden door, Effie still sitting on Sonny's shoulders with a curious expression on her childish face. The rooms within, however, had changed since the last time Sonny had seen them. The luxurious furniture was gone, as well as beautiful decorations covering the walls. Instead, all that met them was barren stone, with a few broken sailor dolls laying on it, their limbs disassembled and laid out around the bodies like macabre pieces of art. The floor of the whole central chamber was covered by a circle made out of a myriad of runes, powerful currents of soul essence flowing through it and dissipating into the ancient stones. Noctis was sitting in the center of the circle, his eyes closed. Without the familiar carefree smile, his beautiful face seemed ominous and strangely terrifying. Hearing their footsteps, the sorcerer slowly exhaled. The crushing flood of essence slowly thinned and then dissipated, retreating back into his body. He turned his head slightly and opened his eyes, which shone in the darkness for a moment, as though full of pale moonlight. Then they slowly turned human again, and Noctis smiled, returning to his usual laid-back persona so suddenly that it seemed almost disturbing. "Ah, Sunless, my friend, you are back. Sit down, have a drink, and welcome." He stood up and outstretched a hand, as if trying to gesture at a set of comfortable seats. Then, a surprised expression appeared on the Transcendent's face, and he looked around the empty hall with a bit of confusion. "Oh right, I've been remodeling." Noctis sighed, then clapped his hands together. "Well, no matter. Dolls, bring my guests something to drink. They must be parched after their journey." His voice echoed around the residence. However, nothing happened. He hesitated, then glanced at the broken mannequins lying on the floor and awkwardly shifted his feet. "Ah, how unfortunate." The sorcerer shook his head, then shrugged and looked at the three of them with a smile. "Anyways, welcome." He tilted his head and stared at Effie, then blinked a couple of times. "Ah, you have brought a child with you. How curious. It doesn't bite, does it?" Sonny frowned, but before he could speak, Effie blurted with feigned outrage. "I am not a child, I am 12, almost." Noctis stared at her with doubt. "It speaks, how bizarre." Sonny slowly inhaled, then said evenly, "This child is called Effie. She is the friend I have told you about." The sorcerer's polite smile remained glued to his face. He stared at Effie some more, then furtively glanced at Kai. "So, one of your friends is a cripple you randomly stumbled upon in my sanctuary, and the other one is a small child." Sonny nodded grimly. Noctis rubbed his chin, and then cautiously said, "Sunless, are you utterly sure that you did not just invent having friends? To make me value our own beautiful friendship more, perhaps? If so, let me assure you, I value it a great deal already. There's no need for you to feel insecure just because you are not as beautiful, wealthy, wise, generous, and delightful to be around as me." Sonny gritted his teeth and then hissed furiously, I am sure that I did not invent them. Are you sure that you really want to know the truth about me and my friends?" Noctis raised his eyebrows with a sincere look on his face. "Well, of course." Sonny stared at him for a few moments and then said, "In that case, My friends and I are not actually a demon, a cripple, and a small child. We are humans from a distant future whose souls were sent here by a nearly almighty entity known as the Nightmare Spell, after the gods had died and this whole world had been destroyed. Oh, and this place. It is not real. You are not real, too. All of it is just a complicated illusion created by the spell to test us three, no, us five, actually. That's the honest truth. The sorcerer looked at him with wide eyes. Then he sighed, shook his head, and uttered in a hurt tone, "Sunless, there's no need to weave such stupid lies to mock me. If you don't want to tell me, you don't have to." He pursed his lips and turned away. "So childish. I take it all went well then. Since you are in the company of a new friend, you must have successfully infiltrated the Temple of the Chalice, found her, retrieved the glass knife, and fled before the war maidens noticed." Sonny flinched, then cleared his throat and remained silent for a couple of seconds. Finally, he said in an even tone, Well, actually, not exactly. We did retrieve Effie and the knife, but—" Noctis looked at him with surprise. "But what?" Sonny coughed. "We sort of destroyed the chalice and killed all the war maidens." The sorcerer stared at him in shock. "You did what?" Kai sighed, and then strained his vocal cords to speak. "We were left with no other choice. The maidens were willing to give us a chance to earn the right to take the glass knife away, but they would have never let Effie go. That was a tenet of their sect, so the sect had to go instead." Noctis stared at them with wide eyes, his face turning deathly pale. He swayed a little and then yelped. "But what do you mean you killed all the maidens? How did you manage to kill them? What about their transcendent sect leader? Did you kill her too?" The three of them looked at each other with confusion. Then Effie cautiously spoke up. The venerable foremother, who was the last transcendent of the Red Sect, died like 200 years ago. There were no other transcendents among the maidens since." The sorcerer blinked a couple of times. "Wait, really? So she just went and died? How pedestrian." Sonny stared at him aghast. Did that fool? Did he really forget that real people had a habit of dying from time to time, unlike his own immortal self? How insane could that charlatan really be? But then he had to stop himself. No, that was not right. Noctis was no fool, he just enjoyed playing one. There was no chance that the immortal would not have known whether or not there were transcendents living in his territory, which could only mean one thing. Sonny took a step forward and growled, "Do not insult us. You knew perfectly well that there were no transcendents in the Temple of the Chalice, and you also knew that you could have easily obliterated that whole place and taken the glass knife, if you wanted to. We three are formidable as far as awakened go, but not nearly as formidable to be able to do something that a chain lord would not have been able to." He glared at the immortal and said, the emerald amulet almost cracking in his fist, "So Noctis, my friend, why don't you tell me the real reason for why you really sent me and Kai there instead of going yourself? And be very careful about what you say, because our beautiful friendship might depend on your answer." Noctis remained silent for a while, looking at him with an unreadable expression. Then he sighed and waved a hand. All right. If you want to be boring, I'll tell you the truth. No need to get angry." He clapped his hands again, and the disassembled sailor dolls suddenly rose from the floor, their limbs flying up and connecting to the wooden torsos. Then, one of them disappeared for a moment and returned with a silver goblet full of fragrant wine, presenting it to the sorcerer with frightened reverence. The others backed away and froze, standing silently near the walls. Noctis took the goblet, took a sip, and looked away with a somber expression on his exquisite face. "Yes, it is true that I could have retrieved the knife, saved your friend, and destroyed the Temple of the Chalice myself. That would not have been too hard, with or without the Transcendent guarding it. However—" He stared west, his eyes turning dark. If I made such a move myself, the other four would have learned of it. Then they would have understood why I made it and what I am going to do next as well. They will know my intentions eventually, of course, but now is not the time. Not yet. Revealing it all now would be troublesome. Sonny scowled, then briefly glanced at Kai. The archer was looking west too, his shoulders tense. The Ivory City lay to the west, the Red Colosseum too. He hesitated, and then said in a grim tone, "So you can't act openly out of the fear that the other chain lords will unite to attack you." Noctis turned to him and smiled. "Fear? No, nothing that whimsical. It is simply a matter of convenience. You see, until—" Suddenly the sorcerer grew silent. His face turned grave, and his eyes shined with a glint of distant moonlight. This time it was not a performance. Sonny could feel that something had really gone wrong because the whole room inexplicably changed, becoming much darker, colder, and full of dire tension. Noctis slowly turned his head and whispered, his voice stunned and solemn. Something changed. No, no, it can't be." He looked toward the doors, and then added with a grim expression, "We have another guest, I think, a messenger from the north." The sorcerer seemed shaken. No, more than that. He seemed deeply troubled by something. Noctis stared at the door for a few moments, then frowned and said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "Let us go and see who is knocking on my door, then." With that, he drained his goblet, threw it aside, and walked toward the exit. Sonny, Effie, and Kai glanced at each other, then followed along. No matter who it was that had come to the sanctuary, they were currently enjoying the sorcerer's hospitality, so the identity of the new arrival concerned them too. Who could have affected Noctis that much? Or was the change he had spoken about the real reason for this strange behavior, while the appearance of a guest just happened to coincide with it? They were going to find out soon. Together, the four of them, three awakened and an immortal saint, crossed the garden of the sanctuary and walked between the ancient menhirs to the field of grass beyond. There, an elegant figure waited for them, dressed in an austere black garment. It was a young woman none of them recognized. The young woman was tall and slender, with pale skin and lustrous raven-black hair that moved gently in the wind. Her face possessed an almost otherworldly beauty to it, its lines full of solemn grace and splendor. However, that lovely face was blemished by a stark flaw. Her eyes were covered by a simple strip of black cloth, the same color as the dress she wore. The contrast between the austere black dress and the flawless white skin, between the softness of her captivating face and the severity of the crude blindfold, created a tantalizing, ominous, and slightly disturbing sight. However, Sonny was not paying attention to the young woman's sublime beauty or to her dress. Instead, his eyes were glued to a single detail. There was a leather belt tied around the beautiful stranger's slender waist, and on it hung a black scabbard. He recognized the hilt of the blade encompassed within in an instant. Quiet dancer Cassie." For a moment, Sonny was overwhelmed by a feeling of profound, boundless relief. She was alive. Cassie was alive. All of them were. And now, despite all the dire trials of this harrowing nightmare, the four of them were finally reunited. It was as though a terrible weight that had been crushing his heart all this time, without him knowing, was suddenly lifted. Sonny felt Effie's grip on his horns grow tighter, and glanced at Kai to see that the young man's eyes were shining behind the wooden mask. The two of them had recognized Cassie, too, and were sharing in his glee. However, a moment later, Sonny's elation was gone. He remembered how and why they appeared in this field of grass to meet Cassie, and looked at Noctis with concern. The sorcerer still had an ashen face, and unlike them, he did not have any warm feelings toward the blind girl. The situation was still strange and dangerous. As if sensing his gaze, Noctis frowned, then looked at the beautiful woman with a dark expression and asked coldly, "An eyeless of the Night Temple, Isn't it terribly far for a blind priestess like you to travel south all alone? Speak, girl, what do you want?" Cassie lingered for a moment, then bowed slightly. When she spoke, her unfamiliar voice sounded deep and pleasant. She said, "Greetings, Lord Noctis. I bring a message from my mistress, the one in the north." The sorcerer grimaced. "Oh yeah, what does that dreadful woman want from me?" The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then lowered her head slightly. "She doesn't want anything, Lord Noctis. My mistress, Lady of the North, blessed of the black skis, is dead." Noctis swayed slightly as if struck. He stared at Cassie with a pale face, then raised a trembling hand and silently grasped his neck. After a few moments, he spoke again. "What are you talking? What is the message she sent exactly?" The blind girl was still looking down. Without raising her head, she answered evenly. "Just these 3 words, I am dead." The sorcerer scoffed. "It takes weeks to get from the night temple to the sanctuary on foot, if one can even make it alive. Was she dead when she sent you?" "Huh." Cassie silently shook her head. "No, she was alive." Noctis gritted his teeth in outrage. That woman so insufferable. If she knew she was going to die, she could have said more than 3 words at least. After everything we shared, she just had to be frustrating till the very end. Despite the sorcerer's irritated tone, Sunny could tell that Noctis was deeply aggrieved by the stunning news Cassie had brought, as if he had not been planning to kill the one in the north himself all along. The immortals were very strange people, indeed. But Sunny was stunned himself. One of the chain lords was already dead. Just like that. After 1,000 years of solemn duty, someone had managed to kill the undying transcendent without alerting the other 4. Suddenly, a feeling of unease grasped his heart. If not one of the chain lords, then who could have killed the ruler of the Night Temple? Who else possessed one of the 7 knives? He knew of only one person. As if reading his thoughts, Noctis stared at Cassie and asked, his voice trembling with anger. "So who was it who killed her, Solving or the Ivory Lord?" The blind girl slowly shook her head. "Neither, it was a creature that came from the fog." The sorcerer chuckled. "I see. So the ivory knife fell into the hands of one of those. She could have saved herself if she had only wanted, but she grew indifferent to things like that a long time ago, didn't she? That was her madness." Noctis remained silent for a while, and then suddenly asked, his eyes glinting with his own madness. "So then, the North is in disarray. The Night Temple is without a leader, and its army needs a new commander. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of awakened warriors, all hopping to find someone to serve and protect their families. Right." Cassie lingered for a moment, then shook her head again. "No." Noctis raised an eyebrow. Why not?" She straightened, then answered simply. "They are also dead." The sorcerer blinked a couple of times. Who is dead?" The young woman remained still as she said, her voice calm and even. "Everyone, the soldiers, the priestesses, the awakened, the families. Everyone is dead and the northern reach stands empty. The creature took them all." Everyone seemed stunned into a grave silence by these words. Even Noctis, who must have heard and seen a lot during his long life. Frozen, Sunny stared at Cassie, his lightless pupils narrowing into 2 vertical slits. Everyone was dead. Everyone. Had Mordred slaughtered an entire region, thousands of people or even tens of thousands. Mundane humans awakened, ascended, even the transcendent Lady of the North herself. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Sunny knew, of course, that the Prince of Nothing, the owner of the friendly voice he had heard once, in the darkness of a bottomless abyss, was formidable, and would have grown more formidable still after being sent into the body of a terror. He also knew that Mordred was not completely of sound mind, and that the influence of hope would have only exacerbated that subtle fissure. But a slaughter on such scale, he had never even thought that Mordred would be capable of committing something like that, and why? What goal was the banished prince pursuing? He was never cruel without a cold and calculated reason, or at least he had not been in the past. Every monstrous act that Mordred had perpetrated before was full of perverse but deliberate practicality. How could something like that be practical? Even forming a seventh corps would not have demanded a hecatomb of that magnitude. Sonny really did not know how to feel. On one hand, the news of a chain lord's demise was beneficial for his plans. In that sense, the Prince of Nothing had already accomplished more to conquer the nightmare than the four of them combined. But on the other hand, Sonny just couldn't help but feel uneasy about it, about Mordred. What was the son of Valor planning? His thoughts were interrupted by Noctis, who let out a deep sigh. Everyone is dead. Ah, I barely remember the last time something like that happened. But when I was young, at the dawn of the Age of Heroes, things like that were rather common. You wouldn't remember, I guess. That is what happens when human champions grow unfit for their duty. He looked away with a dark expression, and then added in a grim tone, "And we, the champions of this kingdom, have been unfit for quite a while now, if the lords can even be called champions still. Come to think of it, I am surprised that this had not happened sooner." He sighed again, then shrugged and turned to Cassie, seemingly having no desire to elaborate on this strange statement. "Thank you for delivering this message, girl. If everyone in the north is dead, that makes you the last one then." The blind woman lingered for a moment, then nodded. Noctis pursed his lips. "Ah, well, I am very sorry. For what it is worth, you are welcome to stay here in my sanctuary. This is a place for those who are lost, lonesome, and have nowhere else to go. Don't hesitate to ask if you need anything." He turned away, as if losing any interest in the conversation, but at that moment Cassie suddenly spoke. "Actually, there is indeed something that I need." The sorcerer stopped, then looked at her with a slight frown and asked with a bit of surprise, "Really? Oh, then tell me. I am sure I'll be able to help." The beautiful young woman placed a hand on the hilt of her rapier, and then said, her voice deep and pleasant, "I am looking for my friends. I wonder if you would be able to help me find them, Lord Noctis." Noctis blinked a couple of times, then glanced at Sonny, Kai, and Effie with a strange expression on his face. Finally, he answered in a cautious tone, "Of course, gladly, but, do you, perhaps, not know how your friends look, where they are, and what they are called? If so, finding them will be difficult." Cassie tilted her head, remained silent for a few moments, and then answered with a bit of confusion, "Why would I not know? I am looking for a four-armed demon, a cripple with a grating voice, and a little girl. Their names are Sunless, Nightingale, and Raised by Wolves. They should be here in your sanctuary, my lord, or at least visited it not too long ago." Noctis smiled radiantly. "You would, wouldn't you? Not knowing something like that would be very strange. Gods, finally someone normal. A four-armed demon, you say? A four-armed. Four. Huh." The sorcerer's voice trailed off, and then he slowly turned to Sonny, seemingly struggling to say anything else. Before he managed to speak again, however, there was a sound of little feet pattering on soft grass, and a small figure collided with the young woman, hugging her with inhuman strength. "Cassie, you're alive." Despite the fact that the blind young woman could perceive several seconds into the future, and had to have known that Effie was going to tackle her, a bewildered expression still appeared on her beautiful face. She remained frozen for a few seconds, and then hesitantly lowered a hand to pat the little girl on the head. "Oh, yes, yes, I am. I'm happy to see you too, Effie." The little girl stared up at Cassie, and then made a pouty face. "What the hell, Cassie? How is this fair? Sunny was short but became tall, Kai was pretty but became hideous, and let's not talk about that, but you were pretty before and became even prettier now. The injustice. The young woman smiled gently, and then tightly hugged the little girl. Why, I think you became very pretty too. Noctis stared at all this, then looked at Sunny with an inexplicable expression. The immortal sorcerer hesitated for a couple of seconds, and then cautiously asked, "Ah, Sunless, is this beautiful priestess one of your friends too?" Sunny glanced at him, and then raised the emerald amulet. "Yes, the last friend I wanted to find. Her name is Song of the Fallen." Noctis remained silent for a while, then looked away and mumbled in a barely audible whisper. "By the moon, I guess I really need to improve my friend-making skills. Otherwise, I would not be able to call myself the friendliest man in all of the Kingdom of Hope anymore." Hearing that, Sunny smiled. He had a reason to. Their small cohort was finally back together. Soon the four of them were gathered in Sunny's room. There was plenty of food on the table and a kettle of fragrant tea. They had a peaceful meal, avoiding discussing anything important, but soon it was time to have a serious discussion. None of the four seemed too excited about the idea, perhaps because doing so would mean revisiting their experiences in the nightmare and opening up wounds that had barely any time to heal. There were a lot of invisible scars each of them was hiding. None of the four had survived these 3 months unscathed. Effie looked at her empty plate for a few moments and then sighed. "Can't we just have a few days off before getting to work? The world won't collapse if we take a small vacation, I think." Sunny glanced at his friends, the bruised girl, the cripple with a disfigured face, and a beautiful young woman whose empty eye sockets were covered by a black cloth, and slowly shook his head. "If we do, Noctis might grow impatient. I promise to give him an answer after I find my friends. He has already been gracious enough to abstain from killing me, putting my soul into a doll, or a mop, and ordering it to give him the knives, so we better not linger." Cassie turned her head slightly and asked, her deep, pleasant voice still sounding strange and unfamiliar. "An answer to what question?" Sunny grimaced, then looked away. "Right, all of you must have already understood what the conflict of this nightmare is. Hope, the demon of desire, Noctis is preparing to rebel against the will of the gods, kill the other immortals and break her chains. And we have to either help him achieve his goal or somehow prevent Hope from escaping. The former seems insane, but the latter seems impossible, considering that she is already able to influence the world from inside her prison." He shivered, grew silent for a few moments, and then added, "Each of the immortals represents, or rather, embodies, one of Hope's eternal shackles. They can only be destroyed by one of the sun god's knives. I am in possession of 2 of the remaining 4 knives. Noctis knows where the third is being kept, and the 4th one is in the hands of Solving, who will freely offer it to anyone who can grant her a worthy death. So while his plan means going to war against 3 ancient saints, it is not entirely crazy, just mostly so." Sunny sighed, poured himself some tea, and concluded, "So we need to decide whether we want to help him in this craziness or not." Cassie nodded, seemingly not surprised by what he told them. Then she lingered for a moment and said, "Then first, we need to share everything we learned about the nightmare while we were apart. The more information we possess, the better informed our decision will be." Sunny took a sip of his tea and shrugged. That was what he wanted to do as well. He studied the faces of his companions and then gripped the emerald amulet tighter. "In that case, I will begin, I guess." Effie, Kai, and Cassie turned to him, trying not to show how curious they really were. And who could blame them? Out of the 4, Sunny's situation was indeed the most abnormal. He hesitated for a few moments and then spoke. "As you might have noticed, the spell sent me into the body of a demon, a shadow demon to be precise. I found myself far to the west, in the territory of the followers of war. Even worse, just seconds after coming to my senses, I stumbled upon a beautiful woman wearing red. That woman was Solving, the transcendent priestess of war god. She easily overpowered me but decided to keep me alive. Effie's eyes glistened when he mentioned Solving. Kai, too, seemed to be shaken by that revelation. After all, he had been an officer of the army that was embroiled in a bloody war against Solving's cult. To soldiers of the Ivory City, her name must have been synonymous with power, death, and horror. To them, Solving was as much of a person as she was an ancient, terrifying myth. Sonny's face grew dark. After that, I found myself in the Red Colosseum, an ancient theater built by hope, which the warmongers had turned into a perverse temple of slaughter. There were thousands of nightmare creatures locked in its dungeons, as well as a few unlucky humans. Every day, we were forced to kill each other. Those who survived received the dubious honor of fighting against the warmongers themselves, and if we somehow prevailed, well, then we got to live another day, just to repeat the whole process come dawn. He remained silent for a while, and then added, I spent 2 months in that purgatory. Of course, I would have succumbed to my wounds very fast if it wasn't for my partner, a captive young man from the Ivory City, Elias. His healing aspect kept me alive, and I kept him alive in the arena. Together, we endured the slaughter day after day, week after week. Still, our days were numbered, so I kept searching for a way to escape. And after 2 months, I finally found it. Sonny touched the terrible scar on his neck and grinned. Turns out, all I had to do was to trick our ascended jailer into chopping my head off. Free of the collar, I killed him, and then got Elias to attach my head back. Kai, who was in the middle of taking a sip of tea, spat it out. And what? Effie only remained silent because she was in the process of choking on a pastry. Her eyes, however, were similarly wide. Even Cassie seemed stunned. Sonny chuckled. Ah, you see, that transcended priestess, Solving. Actually, I had already killed her once. She had been serving as the host body for a corrupted monster, the Fire Keepers, and I had slain in the dream realm to capture the wreck of Noctis's flying ship. That was where I received an enchanted armor that allows its wearer to stay alive for as long as they have essence. I also had means of regaining essence, and so I was able to survive without a head long enough for Elias to heal me. Effie finally managed to swallow her pastry and glanced at Kai with wild eyes. Kai, tell me he's lying, please. The young man blinked a couple of times, then solemnly shook his head. The little girl swore, then mumbled in a small voice. Crazy bastard, he's crazy. Sonny shrugged nonchalantly. What? That wasn't even the craziest part. Anyway, Elias and I almost managed to escape the Red Colosseum, but at the last moment we were intercepted by Solving, that cursed fiend. The smile disappeared from his face, and his black eyes flashed with cold hatred for a moment. She killed Elias, tore my heart out, and threw my body into the sky below. Luckily for me, this demon body has 2 hearts, which was why I didn't die immediately. Solving either didn't know about that or did not care, thinking that the abyss would finish me off. But I survived and found my way back to the Isles, thanks to my memories. He sighed. I survived but was not in the best shape, either physically or mentally. My one remaining heart was not enough to keep this body going, so I was effectively dying, albeit slowly. I made my way south, planning to eventually reach our rendezvous point in the east. However, before I could, I stumbled upon Noctis on the southern island. Sonny smiled bitterly. That mad bastard was very happy to see me. He thought that fate had brought us together, and who knows, maybe it did. We made a deal. He and I, Noctis, would replace my missing heart, and I would learn the location of the glass knife from a terror that resided in the nearby fortress. That terror, you see, had belonged to one of the chain lords before had belonged to the shadow. So was there a better candidate to meet him than a shadow demon? He didn't speak for a while, then let out a heavy sigh. The problem was, the centuries of loneliness and being subjected to hope's poison had driven the creature mad. So it attacked me. That terror had power over dreams and nightmares, and he subjected me to a few hundred of those. In each one I was horribly tortured, experienced unimaginable sorrow, and was eventually killed. Luckily, I had forgotten most of those nightmares, yeah, most of them. Sonny took a sip of tea, then shook his head. Anyway, eventually, I escaped from the nightmares as well by breaking all of them and then killed the terror. Noctis replaced my heart as he had promised and brought me to the sanctuary. Here, I met Kai, and we went to retrieve the glass knife and Effie from the Temple of the Chalice. And here we are. He scratched the back of his head, and then added thoughtfully, "Overall, I guess it could have been worse." Effie swore again, and then shoved another pastry into her mouth. She chewed furiously and then hissed, sending crumbs flying across the table. What the hell could have been worse than that? Sonny stared at her for a moment and shrugged. I don't know, I could have been sent into a body of a worm, or even worse, a child. Effie stared at him with no amusement whatsoever on her childish face, which only made her attempts to appear serious look more comical. Then she scowled and said evenly, "Wanna die?" Sonny shook his head with a grin, then went into more detail about the things he had learned, including various pieces of information he had gleaned in the nightmares, his experience with the warmongers, and his observations about Solving and Noctis. When he was done, there was silence for a while. The others were digesting all the information he had shared with them, full of thought. Well, everyone except Effie. The somber silence was soon broken by the sound of loud chewing. The little girl swallowed a piece of meat pie, then blinked a couple of times, noticing that everyone was staring at her. Finally, she wiped the oil off her lips and said, "What, I'm a growing child, you know. I need to eat well to grow big." Then she wiped her oily fingers on the tablecloth and shrugged. "Well, anyway, I guess I'll go next." The little girl glanced at Sonny, made a face and turned away. There's not much to tell anyway. My 3 months in the Temple of the Chalice were not at all as exciting as Sonny's wild misadventures. Although, her face suddenly grew dim and dark. They weren't very pleasant either. Effie sighed, lingered for a few moments, and spoke in a somber tone. Basically, I was sent into the body of one of the Red Sect's younger disciples, an orphan girl who had been entrusted to the maidens, for better or worse, but mostly worse. As I already said, their teachings had grown cruel and perverse over the centuries. Now that I know about how hope is manipulating everyone's desires, I finally understand why. That's Solving, she had been raised in the Red Sect too a long time ago. The difference is she managed to escape, but we didn't. The little girl trembled. I ran away once early on and managed to make it to the Iron Hand Island, but I was caught, and the punishment at the time, they already knew that nothing they did to me would make me obedient. So they punished the others in my stead. After that, well, I did not try to escape again, at least while the other girls were still alive. Effie grew silent for a bit, then shrugged. So it was pretty boring. Just endless training, battle training, essence training, body conditioning, and all that stuff. How to endure pain, how to endure fear, how to steel your will. How to be a perfect, merciless, lethal vessel of war. Of course, they were very inventive in their lessons. What better way to teach someone to endure pain than to torture them to the brink of death? Or over it if the pupil is weak. The little girl's face turned distant. In the end, everyone turned out to be weak, except for me. She took a bite out of her piece of meat pie, chewed it slowly, and then said, "One time they put me in a coffin and buried me alive for a few days, to teach me how to conquer the fear of darkness. These wretches, who said that I was afraid of darkness to begin with, so stupid. But mostly it was just combat training. They trained us ruthlessly. There's a lot you can achieve with a few awakened healers and no regard for whether your disciples survive or not. If we broke a bone, the healers would put it back together and order us to continue. If we bled too much, well, you get the idea. Effie shook her head. The thing was, though, that I was getting it even worse than the rest. The girl whose body I took had the misfortune of awakening at a very young age, you see. So the maidens saw her as their promised chosen one, a prodigious warrior fated to slay Solvin and wash away the humiliation she had visited upon the sect, to avenge her sin and sacrilege. So they worked me harder than anyone else. The little girl looked away, then sighed. The weirdest part was that all the vile crap they did to us was done without any hint of hatred, malevolence, or bad intentions. On the contrary, the older maidens treated us like their little sisters when they were not torturing and killing us, of course. My teacher, Hilda, I think she thought of me as her own daughter. She cared. A lot of good it did in the end. She hesitated for a moment and then grimaced. Well, anyway, eventually I was the only one left. Actually, I think they went harder on the other girls because of me. My presence reignited their fervor, I think. After everyone else died and the maidens had nothing else to hold over my head, I started planning my escape. I had no idea if I would survive it, but luckily, before I had the chance to find out, Sunny and Kai came and obliterated the whole sect. Cheers. Thanks, by the way. She nodded at them, and then stuffed her mouth with another piece of the pie, clearly unwilling to say anything else. Everyone remained silent, until Cassie leaned over and put her hand on the little girl's shoulder. She gripped it softly and said, "You did well, Effie. You did well to survive." Effie looked down, sighed, and then said darkly, "Ah, but this time I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to save a few people too. But I failed. Who cares, though? I am really way too old to be this sentimental. Or maybe that hope already did a number on my brain. This is just a nightmare after all." Hearing a little girl proclaiming that she was too old to feel grief would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. No one said anything until Kai leaned back and sighed. Then his grating voice resounded in the stone room, sending shivers running down Sunny's spine. "Well, in that case, I guess it is my turn. My story is not that long, though. I didn't do much." He glanced at his hands, with skin that had been replaced by polished tree bark, remained silent for a bit, and then added, "I only fought a dragon and lost." Kai remained silent for a while and then let out a heavy sigh. He looked away, picked up his charred wooden mask and stared at it for a few moments, then finally spoke. "I was sent into the body of a centurion of the Sun Legion, the army of the Ivory City. The city. You must have seen it when we entered the nightmare, rising from the ashes as the time flowed in reverse. It is a wondrous place, beautiful, peaceful, and full of life, with people who are warm, kind, and care deeply for their neighbors. Dozens of flourishing islands, all connected into a single whole by the aerial bridges and arching aqueducts built of white stone." The young man paused, grimaced, and took a sip of honey tea to smooth his aching vocal cords. Then he glanced at the mask again, lingered for a moment, and continued. "At least that was what I thought at the start of it. Looking back, I was terribly naive, but it was so easy to be misled by how the Ivory City and its people appeared, especially by the stark contrast between the splendor of that enchanting facade and the bare-faced vileness of those who wished to destroy it. The merciless, mad killers, warmongers." Kai shook his head. "The people of the Ivory City are just like those we know in the waking world. They have the same values, the same ideals, the same regard for decency and human life. Ah, now that I say it aloud, I realize they might be doing much better than us in that regard. My point is that they seemed nice. Their city was like a beautiful paradise, like a place that all human cities should strive to be. Was it so unexpected, then, that, in this nightmare, there was someone who wanted to destroy it?" His eyes grew dim. The followers of the cult of glory, on the other hand, were exactly like what one would imagine the forces of evil to be. Merciless, cruel raiders that worshipped war, slaughter, and bloodshed, killing simply for the sake of killing. Their perverse fate, their zealous belief that by destroying the lives of innocent people they were delivering the gift of salvation to their victims, murderers and madmen, each and every one of them. So, you might understand why I was blinded to the truth for a while. The young man took another sip of tea, then put down the mask and looked at them with a dark expression. In my naivete, I came to believe myself to be a hero of a grim fairy tale, a noble warrior tasked with protecting a beautiful paradise from the tide of evil. I mistakenly considered the fate of the Ivory City to be the true conflict of the nightmare, and so convinced myself that protecting it was what we had been sent here to do. Unable to abandon my duty and reluctant to become a deserter, I remained with the Sun Legion, thinking that, sooner or later, you guys will join me. Kai looked down and sighed heavily. And so, very soon, I became known as a hero of the Legion. His disfigured face contorted for a moment, but then the young man restrained his emotions and smiled bleakly. I know that fact might sound surprising. Unlike the rest of you, I have never been a fearsome warrior. I have never been a dauntless leader of men as well. My only real act of bravery was facing the Spire messengers in the shadow of the Crimson Spire, and even then, I only survived because of Cassie. So, I was very surprised to find myself gaining fame and renown as a fearless battle commander. Kai looked at them, lingered for a moment, and then said with uncertainty, "The war between the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, you see, has been going on for centuries. Its bloody tides come and go, like those of the sea. Sometimes, only small skirmishes and raids happen for decades, and sometimes there are terrible battles happening every day. Sometimes, only mundane soldiers and awakened officers fight each other, and sometimes, ascended champions appear to sow devastation on the battlefield. Sometimes, even the transcendent lords descend." He paused for a few moments, took a sip of tea, then continued in a neutral tone. "At the time, I found myself in the center of a sudden shift from a prolonged period of relative calm to the start of a massive offensive by the warmongers. And very early on, I discovered an unexpected truth." He glanced at them, thought for a second as though carefully choosing his words, and said, "You see, I was always under the impression that warriors of this mythical era, when gods were still alive and magic permeated the world, were infinitely more knowledgeable, powerful, and proficient in battle than we, humans of the waking world, are. But as it turns out, that is not so. Maybe a long time ago, during what they call the Age of Heroes, they had been. But now, most of them are far less deadly than we have become, at least those of us who had been forged and tempered by the Forgotten Shore." Sonny raised an eyebrow, surprised by that statement. Noticing his expression, Kai tilted his head a little. "Nightmare creatures are nowhere near as numerous here as they are in the future. There is no spell, no nightmares, no trial of the dream realm, no gates. Unlike them, each of us had been forced into a life of bloodshed and conflict, thrown against unimaginable horrors with no choice to retreat or surrender. The spell might be a cruel teacher, but its vile lessons seem to be morbidly effective. Grow stronger or die, there is no other way for us. So, most awakened from the real world would have experienced more strife and battle encounters than an average awakened warrior of this time period." He sighed and then added somberly, "That was why even I, despite my humble aspect and lacking battle prowess, was able to stand out. I led my soldiers to victory, keeping them alive through the sudden attack by a large force of the warmongers. And then, I kept them alive through the rest of the campaign, wreaking havoc on the enemy anywhere my centuria appeared." Kai grew quiet for a long time, and then added, his ugly voice suddenly sounding especially hoarse and grating, "And that was how I gained the attention of the radiant lord of my city of Severax, the Ivory Dragon. Kai poured more tea into his cup, then cradled it in his hands and looked away. He remained silent for a bit, then continued the ominous story. After many weeks of battles and bloodshed, the warmongers were pushed back, and my centuria was recalled back to the Ivory City to rest and recuperate from the hardships of war. We were met by a jubilant crowd that showered us with rose petals and sang our names, my name, too, louder than all the rest. Ah, what a beautiful sight it was! Victorious, we returned home, and everything was well. For a while, we enjoyed the beauty of the city and the warm company of our fellow citizens. He took a sip, then shook his head slightly. The more I explored the beautiful Ivory City, the more elated I was by its prosperity and its harmonious way of life. It seemed as though people there were all content and happy, treating others with sincere kindness, love, and respect. It was as though they didn't have a care in the world, and there was a reason for that. The people of the Ivory City could live this way, and be this way, because they were protected by the mighty dragon, Severax, a true descendant of Sun God, their lord and protector. The young man shivered, then added in a hoarse voice, "The dragon protected them, provided for them, and guided them with his wisdom. It was because of him that the Ivory City was safe, sound, prosperous, and welcoming, why its citizens were so kind and happy. This was a paradise of his creation." Kai took a sip of tea and smiled sadly. "Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Ah, but it was. I was just too slow to see it." He remained silent for a bit, then let out a long sigh. "At first I only felt it, a slight, vague wrongness, as if something was off with these kind, happy, beautiful people, as if there was something hidden behind their sincere smiles. I dismissed it, thinking that it was just my prejudice speaking, a mindset that I brought with me from the waking world. But the more time I spent with them, the more strange details I started to notice, and soon a harrowing suspicion took hold of my heart." Kai looked at them, his face growing dark. A suspicion that there was madness hidden deep in their lustrous eyes, the same madness that the warmongers were infected with, albeit of a different shade. I had never felt as disturbed and afraid as when that thought first entered my mind. I was so afraid, in fact, that for a few days I closed my eyes to the truth and pretended that nothing was wrong. But the suspicion kept gnawing on my heart, and so I decided to investigate. It wasn't hard to confirm it. A bitter grimace contorted his hideous face. You see, as it turned out, the Ivory City was indeed prosperous, safe, and beautiful because of the dragon. Its people were indeed protected and provided for by the dragon. In return, the dragon only asked for one thing in return. The young man clenched the teacup, almost causing it to crack. "To feed him." He gritted his teeth for a moment, then said quietly, "To feed him with human flesh." 7 sacrifices had to be made to him every month from the ranks of the citizens, and the kind, warm people of the Ivory City were more than happy to provide. Ecstatic, even. Being devoured by the dragon was considered to be a sacred honor, and having a loved one chosen as a sacrifice was a cause for celebration. The young man grew silent, then said hoarsely, "The dragon never dictated who had to be fed to him, but the people of the Ivory City wanted above all else to please the dragon, and so they always chose the best and the brightest, the most beautiful, the most talented, the most innocent, the most desirable. And there we were, young heroes who had just returned from a triumphant war. The month was up, and so they chose me and 6 of my most brave and loyal soldiers." Kai smiled bitterly. What a reward! The sight of them was the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. Parents surrendering their children to death with zealous smiles, husbands sending their wives into the dragon's maw with wild joy, friends and neighbors singing and laughing as they led their fellow humans to be eaten by a hungry beast. Only little children did not share in their glee. They cried when their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters were torn away from them, not understanding what was happening. But the crying children were punished and taught a harsh lesson about how repugnant their behavior was. He grimaced, then put his cup down and looked away. The whole city was insane. Perhaps, perhaps one could argue that a few dozen souls a year are a small price to pay for a paradise. But what is a paradise built on blood worth? Worthless. It's worthless. And even if it's not, at least the wretches could have made the sacrifice without the ghoulish joy, without the songs and the zeal and the kind, warm, sincere smiles on their beautiful faces. Kai took a deep breath, remained silent for a while, and then shrugged dismissively. Anyway, we were brought to an island that bordered the ivory tower itself and chained to a white cliff. The jubilant crowd disappeared, and soon after that, we heard the rustle of mighty wings. The dragon landed in front of the cliff, as majestic and fearsome as he was in the legends. A great beast with beautiful ivory scales, and radiant golden eyes that were full of wisdom, nobility, and inhuman intelligence. Effie was listening with wide eyes, biting her fingers. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore and asked in her soft, childish voice, "How the hell did you survive? Why didn't the dragon's flames kill you?" A sad smile appeared on Kai's disfigured face. "How did I survive? Oh, that was simple, really. When Severax appeared, I broke my chains and shielded my comrades, ready to defend them until my last breath. Seeing this, the dragon, he spoke to me." His smile slowly disappeared, replaced by an expression of anger, shame, and regret. "You must have already guessed that Ivory Dragon Severax is also Sevras, the Ivory Lord, one of the Hope's eternal shackles, a transcendent whose transformation ability allows him to turn into a dragon. He is a human, or at least was a human once, a long time ago. And so, he spoke to me." The young man sighed. He was amused by my reaction. We spoke, and what he told me, it broke me a little, I think. You see, I had it all wrong. The dragon, he had never once asked the people of the Ivory City to sacrifice anyone or anything to him. They had invented the story themselves and chose the number of the victims themselves and started bringing him sacrifices of their own free will, because doing so made them feel as though they were binding themselves to the dragon, that they were becoming a part of the dragon, and so were of the dragon and safe from him. Kai shook his head. Severax, Sevras, he had lost a part of himself a long time ago, I think. He told me that in the beginning he wanted to be a good lord for the people, someone whom they could see and whom they could strive to become. And so he rarely appeared in his transcendent form before them. But as centuries passed, he noticed that people were disturbed by his human face and were only at peace when he came as a dragon, as if they needed him to be something else, something greater than them. And so, after a while, he abandoned his human form completely. And not long after that, the sacrifices began. The young man lingered for a few moments, and then continued. I asked him to spare our lives, but he refused. He told me that he had never accepted an unwilling sacrifice and I was free. But the other 6, it was as though they were in a trance or had gone mad. They didn't even try to save themselves. No matter how I begged him to spare them, he refused. This was what his people desired, what they needed. They might have not been bound to him, but he was bound to them, burdened by them. And so, when nothing else worked, I foolishly tried to stop him. He smiled bitterly. But how could I defeat a dragon? I am not a dragon myself, after all. He swatted me to the ground with one swipe of his tail, breaking my ribs and almost killing me. But I did not die, instead, paralyzed. I watched as he turned his head, opened his maw, and turned my soldiers into ash with one immolating breath. Kai grew silent, his face unmoving. After a while he spoke again. Overwhelmed with anger, grief, and despair, I screamed at him, cursing him, swearing that I will tell everyone the truth, that I will make them realize, that I will make them change. But he just looked at me tiredly and said that I will see. And then the ivory dragon was gone, leaving me alone on the empty island. He looked down. I was too injured to move and spent the rest of the night in the throes of pain. In the morning, the citizens of the Ivory City came. When they saw that I was alive, a pale smile appeared on his hideous face. They were stunned, scared, and angry, and so they built a pyre, tied me to a stake, and burned me. No matter what I tried to say, no matter how I tried to make them understand, they wouldn't listen. They only grew more scared and hateful. The dragon, he had been right. He had told me the truth. I saw. Kai picked up his tea, took a sip, and looked away. My bindings broke before I died, and so, horribly burned, I shot into the sky like a spark. I flew away from the city and somehow survived. Crippled and heartbroken, I slowly made my way east, finally reaching the Iron Hand Island, and then the sanctuary where Sunny eventually found me. Lord Noctis had replaced my burned skin and damaged muscles with enchanted wood and tree bark, and here I am. As good as new. He sighed, looked at them, and smiled. Luckily, I had friends that helped me pick myself up. You guys. I'll do whatever it is you decide to do, but if there is one thing I want to say, it is this. If Noctis wants to kill Lord Severax and end the dragon's reign, I would be happy to lend a hand. When Kai was finished with his story, everyone remained silent for a while. Eventually, the young man sighed and stretched out his hands, which were covered in polished bark and looked more like those of one of the sailor dolls than those of a human. He moved his fingers and then smiled lightly. Noctis did a wonderful job of healing my wounds. Just as he had said, some of the pain remains, but I am as strong and capable as I had been before. No, even more so, these enchanted limbs he gave me are much more sensitive to soul essence, and so they are more durable and powerful than my own flesh had been. I also collected a few memories during my time in the Sun Legion. Overall, my battle prowess has increased a lot since we entered the nightmare, not to mention the experience I earned and the lessons I was taught. Whatever comes, I am ready. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then let out a low growl. What about the other transcendent of the Ivory City, the Sun Prince? Have you met him? Kai frowned and made a vague gesture with his hand. Yes, I think. The Sun Prince is supposed to be a brother of Severax. Among the people, it is believed that his soul resides inside the metal colossus that guards the Ivory City and sometimes leads the Sun Legion into battle. I've seen him once from afar, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure if that thing is sentient or not. He hesitated for a bit and then added, You've seen him too. I think that it is his corpse that swings beneath the shipwreck island, tangled in the chain, although I can't quite imagine what kind of force could have destroyed that implacable giant. He is at least 90 meters tall, with a body cast out of solid steel and nearly invincible. He is. He is also not a living creature, really, and so can't be killed by wounding or damaging his body. Sunny remained silent for a bit and then said, There is nothing that can't be killed or destroyed, not even the gods. So then, 3 of the Chain Lords are accounted for in the future. We've seen the bones of the dragon, Severax, on the Ivory Island, and both his brother and Solving found their doom near the wreck of Noctis' ship. But what exactly happened? How did they fall, and how did Hope escape? What happened to Noctis himself, as well as the one in the north? How was the Ivory City destroyed? How did the tower break free of its chains? No one answered, as perplexed as he was. After some time, Cassie finally spoke. I am not sure what happened, but I know one thing: because of our arrival, it is happening faster. They turned to her, and after a moment of silence, Sunny asked, Yours is the last story left, and to be honest, it is the story I am interested in hearing the most, because it concerns the 5th awakened sent here by the spell. Mordred, he found a way to enter the seed with us, didn't he? Cassie sighed heavily and turned her head away. After a while she said, Yes, he did. The blind young woman remained silent for a few moments, gathering her thoughts, and then faced them again. Unlike what happened to the 3 of you, my arrival into the nightmare was not too harrowing. at least not at the start. I was sent into the body of a young priestess whose duty was to tend to the high priestess of the Night Temple, the one in the north. In this era, the Night Temple still belongs to the cult of the goddess of the black skis, of Storm God, the deity of darkness, stars, and guidance, and so no light is allowed on the temple's premises. She touched her blindfold briefly, then slowly lowered her hand. The acolytes spend long years living in the darkness and blind themselves before becoming priestesses. For that reason, they are known as the eyeless. Many of the eyeless are seers and possess powers of prophecy and divination. For most, becoming a blind priestess inside a lightless temple would have been a terrible trial, but for me, it was strangely soothing. To find myself among those similar to me, in a place where my blindness wasn't an aberrant oddity, but instead a choice. A pale smile appeared on her lips. However, it was my lady that I found the most comfort in. The one in the north, the oracle of the night. She was not unkind. She treated me well enough. And I have learned a lot from her knowledge and wisdom. However, just like the rest of the chain lords, she was being consumed by an insidious madness. Hers was the madness of apathy. Over the centuries, my lady grew indifferent to most things happening in the world, or even to herself. That was why she needed attendants, and I was one of them. The smile slowly disappeared from Cassie's face. That didn't mean that she was powerless or without responsibility, though. All of the northern reaches of the Kingdom of Hope were under her authority and protection. There were many villages and several towns full of mundane humans who relied on the Night Temple for safety and guidance. For that reason, the one in the north ruled not only over the blind priestesses, but also over a small, but fearsome army comprised of both mundane warriors and awakened. She sighed slightly. Their numbers might not have been as large as those of the armies of the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, but due to their prowess and my lady's prophetic gift, the North was never attacked by either. The people rarely suffered from the nightmare creatures as well. Cassie grew silent, and a scowl slowly appeared on her beautiful face. But as the one in the north grew more and more indifferent, that slowly started to change. Still, when I found myself in the Night Temple, things were still more or less fine. Her scowl deepened and her face grew dark and despondent. The blind young woman lingered and then said in a grim voice, "Until they weren't." It was getting late and darkness crawled into the stone room, drowning its corners in shadows. Cassie sat motionlessly, the graceful lines of her beautiful face contorted by a deep scowl. Then, a heavy sigh escaped from her lips. It started soon after I entered the nightmare, but no one paid it much attention at first. There were just strange rumors that reached the temple, resembling scary stories that people like to tell each other when the sun is gone and darkness envelops the world. Rumors of a pleasant voice that came from the fog. She gritted her teeth for a moment. Perhaps if my lady's affliction was not as severe, we could have done something then. After all, in this world, scary stories often come true, and this one was more ominous than the rest because it had to do with the fog. The Night Temple stands at the boundary of the Hollow Mountains, after all, and of the mist that shrouds them. But she was distant and uncaring, and so we had grown aloof too. Cassie somberly shook her head, then continued, her low, deep voice enveloping the room and her three listeners. As time went by, the rumors started to change. They grew more menacing and dire, telling tales of people who listened to the fog and disappeared without a trace. At that point, the eyeless grew concerned, suspecting that a corrupted creature had found its way into their land. Many of them possessed a high affinity to revelation, after all, and they could feel it. Unease, threat, danger. So a priestess was sent to investigate, escorted by a squad of experienced awakened soldiers. And at the same time, it was decided that a divination would be performed. She lingered for a moment. The divination showed no result, and the priestess, she failed to return with useful clues. In fact, she did not return at all. She and her escort disappeared without a trace, as though they had never existed. Just like the people from the rumors, only, by then, no one thought of them as mere rumors anymore. The blind young woman shivered, then said in an even voice, "Finally, we became alarmed. The army was summoned and many hunting parties were sent out to find the creature. Mundane soldiers, awakened warriors, ascended champions, the eyeless. Everyone was determined to catch the abomination. But despite all our efforts, we failed. How could we catch the fog?" Cassie's face darkened. And all the while, people continued to disappear. First one or two at a time, then scores of them, and then, one day, we found a whole village that stood empty, not a sign of its inhabitants in sight. Everyone there, every man, woman, and child was taken by the fog. She grew silent for a few moments, then added grimly, "And then hunting parties started to disappear too. Powerful, experienced soldiers. We even lost and ascended. The worst part, however, was that there was no pattern to the creature's movements, at least none that we could recognize. It could attack a settlement far to the west one day, and then suddenly take someone far to the east the next. It was almost as if it could be in several places at the same time. Because of that, we couldn't throw all our forces into one location and corner it on a single island. And so, we constructed a trap for it. All we needed was a lure, and I volunteered to become one." The blind young woman shook her head. "Of course, back then, I didn't know that the fiend of the fog was far more cunning and devious than any nightmare creature I had ever faced. But I found out very soon, because that was when I met him again. And as soon as I did, I realized that what we thought of as a trap for the fiend was, instead, a trap that the Prince of War lured us in instead." Cassie gritted her teeth. "Because while our forces were concentrated to form the encirclement, most of the northern reach remained unprotected. And so, left without defenders, one of the towns was taken by the fog. 1,000 souls gone, slaughtered." A deep scowl appeared on Sonny's face. He leaned forward, piercing her with an intense gaze. "What? How? If he was engaged in a battle with the forces of the Night Temple, how did the bastards simultaneously attack the settlement?" She lingered for a while, then said with a hint of uncertainty, "That Mordred, he was not how he had been in the future. He had grown, weaker somehow, as if he did not possess 6 soul cores anymore. But instead, there were 5 strange creatures helping him, like the lesser versions of the one you had killed on the Reckoning Island. While we fought the prince himself, the 5 creatures attacked the town that we had left unprotected, slaughtering every human who lived there." Sonny leaned back stunned. "And what? 5 of them, 5 reflections. Did he tear his soul apart to create them, granting each a single soul core?" Suddenly, a frightening thought entered his mind. No, this can't be. Divine aspect holders like Mordred and him followed a slightly different path than the rest of the awakened. Unlike those with aspects of a lesser rank, they could create 7 soul cores by absorbing fragments, whether of souls or shadows, didn't matter. But there was still a limit to the number of cores they could create, and to grow more powerful after that, they had to challenge nightmares like everyone else. So, Mordred's slaughter did not make any sense. He had already been a terror in the future after all. The creatures, however, followed a path that was different entirely and almost reversed. By absorbing fragments, they did not create new soul cores. Instead, they rose in rank, like Saint, for example, who had to consume shadow fragments from memories in order to ascend. If Mordred's reflections were the same as Saint, if they only needed a certain quantity of fragments to rank up, then there was no limit to how many fragments they could devour, and no end to their growth, not until they reached the mythical divine rank. So if the Prince of Nothing sacrificed 5 of his 6 soul cores to create 5 awakened beasts, then what was their rank now after consuming thousands upon thousands of souls? Effie and Kai seemed like they had some questions, but they chose to remain silent, at least for now. Of course, they knew who Mordred was and had a general impression of his powers. Sunny and Cassie had described their experience in the Night Temple to them in enough detail, so that their friends, as well as the Fire Keepers, knew what they would be facing should they cross paths with the Prince of Nothing. However, even Sunny himself had only a vague understanding of how Mordred's aspect functioned, and so did Cassie. So hearing how powerful he had grown in the nightmare was a shock to him. The mirror beast was a devil. Had it been created as such, or had it earned more cores in battles with powerful nightmare creatures, as Saint did? If it is the former, then does it mean that Mordred was more than a terror once? He had many reflections before Clan Valor imprisoned him. 2. Gods, just what kind of a menace was Anvil's firstborn in the past? And more importantly, just how dangerous was he going to become in the future? His somber thoughts were interrupted by Cassie, who spoke again after remaining silent for a while. In any case, destroying Mordred's body was not too hard. He appeared wearing the body of the priestess who had been first sent to find him anyway. But of course, doing so was useless because he could just take another. In the chaos of the battle, I couldn't explain what dire powers the enemy possessed to the forces of the Night Temple, and more than that. She shook her head somberly. In the moment, I was not sure that it would have been the right thing to do. Was I meant to help the inhabitants of the nightmare slay one of the awakened from the waking world? Were we not supposed to be allies? No matter how vile Mordred was, and despite what had happened between us in the past, here in the nightmare, both he and I were meant to pursue the same goal. The blind young woman sighed. So, after a bloody battle, Mordred escaped our trap and disappeared. Soon after that, we learned of the massacre that had taken place while we were distracted by his deceit, and after witnessing the desolate town that his reflection had slaughtered, I was disabused of the notion that he and I were the same in any way. Sadly, by that time, it was already too late. Cassie lowered her head, then continued quietly. After feasting on the souls of the town's inhabitants, the reflections became much more powerful. Mordred was not bound by the necessity to stay hidden anymore as well. His attacks grew much more frequent and devastating, and the number of his victims started to grow with chilling speed. The more people he killed, the more dangerous he became. He was not invincible, of course. Among the awakened serving the Night Temple, there were a lot of those who possessed means to contain him, especially the eyeless, who, like me, were immune to his possession. But Mordred knew that as well, and so he went after those who could threaten him first. She paused for a moment, her face growing solemn. Eventually, those who were still alive at least, became so terrified that they left their homes and fled to the Night Temple, hoping that the High Priestess would protect them. The army and the priestesses grew desperate as well. We begged the one in the north to intervene. She was a transcendent, and an oracle without an equal after all, and despite her indifference, my lady promised to face the creature herself. That day, people were so relieved that they held a grand celebration. Cassie remained silent for a while, and then continued, her voice growing sad and wistful. While everyone was celebrating, however, my lady summoned me in secret and asked me to deliver a message to her old friend, Lord Noctis in the east. Just 3 words, I am dead. She paused for a moment and turned away, her beautiful face growing still. I was appalled, of course. What about her immortality? What about all these people whom she promised to protect? She smiled sadly and told me that they were all dead as well, and that it was better that way. A heavy sigh escaped from Cassie's lips. I left the next morning and made my way south all alone. Traveling through the wilderness of the Kingdom of Hope, blind and without anyone's help, was not easy, but I managed to survive somehow. Whether by luck or due to the one in the north protecting me, Mordred never intercepted me. I had to face a few powerful nightmare creatures, though, as well as other dangers along the way. I overcame these obstacles and eventually reached the sanctuary. And on the day that I arrived, I finally felt it, the sudden change. A dark expression appeared on her face. My lady had died and another flaw was added to Hope's prison. The approaching disaster was accelerated even more. You know the rest. For a moment, Sonny could sense a hint of profound sorrow in Cassie's voice, but then it disappeared, and the blind young woman smiled. So now, I guess we know enough to make a decision about whether or not to support Noctis in his war against the rest of the Chain Lords. He frowned and then said in a grim tone, "There is one thing we don't know, though, something that can potentially change everything. Mordred, what is his goal? What is he going to do when the 4 Chain Lords go to war?" Cassie hesitated and slowly shook her head. "That I don't know. He must have realized the nature of the nightmare's conflict himself by now, or maybe he had always known it, through means that none of us can even guess about. He was the one who had sought out this seed, put the idea of seeking out the knives into our heads, and manipulated us into bringing him here after all. No matter what his goal is, though, I doubt that he just wants to become a master. He is here for something else as well." Sonny remained silent for a bit, then let out a frustrated growl and turned away. "All right then, I guess it is time to choose our fate." No one spoke for a while before Effie finally broke the silence. "I mean, it is not much of a choice, is it? Sure, going against 3 immortal saints does not seem like a picnic, but we already know that they had been defeated in the end somehow, so it is not impossible to do. And we don't even know what the alternative is. How do we ensure that Hope doesn't escape her prison? Kill Noctis? That would only delay the inevitable, since this whole damned place is already on the verge of collapse because of her influence. That Hope, she is scary." She hesitated for a moment, then asked with a bit of confusion, "To be honest, I'm not even sure what she is. What kind of a demon is powerful enough to drive a whole region mad? Is she unholy?" Sonny sighed, then massaged his temples. "No, if anything, she is divine. She is also not a demon, she is a demon. Demons were lesser deities of sorts who are said to have created themselves. They appeared out of nowhere, possessing powers that were similar to those of the gods but different. The spell has a weird tendency to never mention the word demon, though, for some reason. In any case, it seems that the gods and the demons eventually had a big, terrible war, and Hope's imprisonment and escape were a prelude to that war, I think." Effie listened to him without any particular expression, then said listlessly, "Oh, well, in that case, that just proves my point. Trying to keep a thing like her in chains, doesn't killing 3 immortal saints suddenly seem easy in comparison?" Kai moved slightly, and then his hoarse voice suddenly resounded in the stone room. "I think we are looking at it wrong. The question is not what should we do, it is what should be done, don't you think? Yes, there is no particular way in which a nightmare has to be resolved, but that doesn't mean that some resolutions cannot be right and some cannot be wrong. This land has been turned into hell by Hope, who is trying to escape her chains. Until she is released, that will not change." He leaned forward, frowned, and added somberly, "The Red Colosseum, the Ivory City, and all across the ruins of her kingdom, madness reigns, turning humans into wicked perversions of themselves. Sure, we can win by prolonging it. But should we? Would we be at peace with such a conclusion? You can call me naive, but I think that although the spell does not dictate what the challengers do in the nightmare, it still matters why we do it. We are still responsible for our actions and their consequences. So, I think that we need to do what is right." Sonny glanced at him and then asked, his voice harsh, "Who's to say what is right? How do you know that by releasing Hope, we won't be dooming everyone living here to an instant death? 1,000 years in chains, personally, I would have been a bit angry." Kai lingered for a moment, then shook his head. "You are right, I might not know what is right, but I do know what is wrong, and what I saw here was deeply, deeply wrong." Sonny stared at him for a bit, then shrugged. "Well, it's not like I disagree. In fact, I hate this place with a passion. I don't really care if Hope simply kills everyone either. As far as I'm concerned, the bastards deserve it." He waited for a few moments, then turned to Cassie. "What about you? You've been terribly quiet." The blind young woman hesitated for a while, then spoke evenly. "I am willing to do whatever you decide. I'll trust your judgment, Sonny." He frowned, studying her face with a dark expression. "Why, you don't have an opinion?" Cassie remained silent for a bit, then simply shook her head. "Damnation." He knew, of course, why the blind girl was reluctant to speak. She must have seen something, a glimpse of the future that she did not want to share, knowing that it would affect their thinking, possibly informing the very event she wanted to happen or wished to avoid. Her own opinion was already compromised by that knowledge, and so Cassie had decided to remove herself from the decision completely. It seemed as though she had grown wary of her visions and the consequences of acting on them after the Forgotten Shore. "Damned oracles." Sonny sighed, then glanced at Effie and Kai. "Well, then there is not much to discuss. The two of you are keen to join Noctis, and I guess I am too. He might be a madman, but at least he is a madman we know. And I also sort of like the guy, despite the fact that he is a dishonest, lying, conniving, crazy, dastardly cheat. No one is perfect, you know." Effie giggled. "Wow, it's almost as if he's reminding me of someone. Huh, now who might that be?" Then she grinned at Sonny and asked, "That's settled then. So, should we go and deliver the good news to that dastardly cheat? You know, about how he doesn't need to kill us and put our souls into home appliances." She seemed like she was ready to go, but Sonny stopped her with a hesitant gesture. This next part, he had thought about it a lot, not knowing if it was the right thing to do or a giant mistake. He was still not sure, but had a feeling that the decision he had made in the end was a correct one. At least it felt that way. In any case, there was no going back. Sonny remained silent for a bit, and then glanced at his friends with a tense expression. "Before we do, there is something I need to tell you." Effie and Kai stared at him with slight surprise written on their faces, while Cassie's eyebrows suddenly flew up. She already knew what was about to happen, of course. Kai looked at him and smiled. "Oh, what is it?" Sonny sighed, turned away, then faced them and shrugged. It's nothing too serious, just, well, to tell you the truth." He gripped the emerald amulet tighter and said, "My flaw is that I can't lie. I have a true name which I received in my first nightmare. My aspect is of the divine rank. I have 3 soul cores, actually, shadow cores, which technically makes me a demon. Hence this ugly body. I have already unlocked my aspect's legacy. I inherited the lineage of one of the 7 demons. Oh, and also, how do I say this? I might be Lord Mongrel. Sorry about that one, Kai." Effie, who was already standing up to leave, froze, then slowly sat back down. Kai dropped his wooden mask to the floor and stared at him with wide eyes. Even Cassie seemed a bit stunned, despite knowing most of the things he had just said already. A deathly silence settled in the room, and Sonny found himself being pierced by 2 dumbfounded gazes. He scratched his neck, then coughed awkwardly and looked away. "Yeah, that's more or less all that I wanted to say." Of course, the decision to reveal these secrets to his friends had not been an easy one. In fact, it went against everything that Sonny believed in. Every instinct in his body screamed that he was making a terrible mistake. But instinct was not always the best advisor. Otherwise, what was the point of having intelligence and the ability to think about your decisions? The fact of the matter was that Sonny had already done irreparable damage to his relationships once because of his untrusting nature. Back on the Forgotten Shore, he had kept his secrets a little bit too well, failing to understand how his deceptiveness would make others perceive him. Sure, he had a reason to behave the way he had. And yes, he had never really lied to his allies, simply withholding or manipulating the information a little to keep himself safe. But the others did not know about his reasons. All they knew was that their trust was never returned fully, and that he was full of secrets, discrepancies, and insidiously subtle ways to keep those secrets to himself. Sonny had never explained himself, and in the absence of an explanation, the misunderstanding was bound to inevitably take its place, perhaps to dire results. Who knew, if he had been more open with Nephi's, she might have not considered him a liar, absorbing that false perception into her own forming self. Would things have ended differently then? Regardless, currently, Sonny knew both the aspects, and more importantly, the flaws of every member of the cohort. But they couldn't say the same. They revealed their weaknesses to him, but he held on to his own, failing to reciprocate this trust. For now, everything seemed fine, but that one-sided nature of their friendship was bound to fester in the future, and the small crack it created could grow in size, eventually destroying it. Plus, even Mordred knew his secrets. It would have been silly if the Prince of Nothing did, but Effie and Kai did not to mention dangerous. So Sonny decided to take a leap of faith and put his trust in his friends. It had been a long time coming anyway, but damnation. Why did being honest with people feel so disgusting? What a loathsome sensation. Curses, I'm all itchy. After a full minute of stunned silence, Effie finally spoke, her voice sounding uncharacteristically tame. Now hold on, wait a minute. She raised her small hand and showed one finger. Your flaw, we sort of already had a general idea after spending so much time with you. It is still wait, you can't lie at all. What? Sonny shrugged. I can't say a lie aloud, and I am compelled to answer any question asked of me truthfully, or at least to the best of my ability. He expected some sort of spicy question to follow immediately, but Effie remained silent, showing just how bewildered she was. Even her usual mischievousness disappeared. Instead, the little girl simply raised a second finger. All right, the true name, we sort of figured that out too. You seemed reluctant to share it for some reason, so Kai and I did not press. Sonny let out a heavy sigh, hesitated for a moment, then forced himself to speak. That has to do with an innate ability of my aspect. If certain conditions are met, it can make me vulnerable to those who know my true name. That is why I kept it a secret, and also put a lot of effort into appearing as weak and pathetic as possible, so that no one would even suspect that a weakling like me could possess a true name. His face grew a bit dim. Being considered a weakling is generally great, because it makes enemies underestimate you. I'm more than fine with people thinking little of me. But, after I started pretending, things got out of hand really fast. Effie blinked a couple of times, remained silent for a moment, and raised a third finger. Well, I guess that explains a few things. Now about Lord Mongrel we knew, of course. I mean, it was sort of obvious. At that point, both Kai and Cassie turned to her and spoke simultaneously. Kai seemed even more surprised than before. What? I didn't know. Cassie, meanwhile, seemed a bit confused. She asked hesitantly, I am sorry, but who is Lord Mongrel? Effie stared at them with a funny expression. What do you mean, you did not know? You were the one who helped him buy that armor. Kai opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Wait, what armor? I helped the stone armor from the memory market. That dusty, ugly thing. No, it's not the same. The material is completely different. The fit, the design, Mongrel's armor is very chic. Not at all like that cumbersome stone clunker. Sonny covered his face, then said somberly, the stone changes to a stone-like metal due to an enchantment. It was just broken and required an awaken to activate the restoration process. As for the fit, You do remember that memories adjust themselves to accommodate the owner's body, right? Hell, now that I have a tail, even it is armored when I summon the mantle. The young man stared at him with a lost expression, then leaned back on his chair. Oh, I see then, but I mean, no, never mind. Sonny massaged his temples. I never meant for Mongrel to get famous. I just wanted to practice swordsmanship in the dreamscape, and all good aliases were already taken. Who knew that a damned broadcaster would spread the clip of me dispatching him everywhere on the network? Oh, gods and things only got worse after that. Effie looked at him, then at her 3 fingers, then made a little fist. But the rest, a divine aspect. What? Do those even exist? 3 soul cores, a demon's lineage, what even is that? And what is next? Are you going to tell us that you have a divine memory or something? The little girl let out a nervous giggle and mockingly shook her head. Sonny stared at her for a bit, then cautiously cleared his throat. Well, actually, I have 2. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.